Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 315 or 315. I have a new iPhone. I did not want to buy a new iPhone, but imminent threat of 25% tariffs can make you do crazy things with your money. It's nice. It's kind of heavy. And there's a lip on the bottom of the case, which is kind of a dumb design decision when the method of unlocking your phone is to swipe up from the bottom. My previous phone was an iPhone SE because for someone who likes to think himself as like a techie, I'm ridiculously diehard about how much I love Touch ID. I reach in my pocket, the phone is unlocked by the time it gets to my face, but now I need to retrain myself to like take it out of my pocket, look at the phone, swipe up. So it's just a matter of what I am getting used to something new, which is something that we're all adapting with right now in a variety of different ways. So I think we're just going to dive right into the episode here. So joining me today on Random is Aleks.
Hello.
And Paul.
Hi there.
So we're going to talk about two games today, two recent releases, and then we're going to do a little bit of a dive just into our thoughts about some trends in the gaming industry that did not pan out for a variety of studios, but mainly Sony, at least that we know of. So that'll be an interesting conversation. But first, we want to talk about Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector. So this is a very recent sequel to Citizen Sleeper that was released in May of 2022 for PC, Xbox, the Switch. Also came to the PS4 and 5 in, I think, last year. It was developed by Jump Over the Edge, and it became a bit of a critical darling. It was a fascinating, very, very almost tabletop-y video game. It had a huge level of narrative depth. It was tabletop-inspired mechanics, a lot of dice rolling. It had visual novel style storytelling, but much more active than a visual novel because of the tabletop RPG mechanics. So players roll dice at the beginning of each cycle, allowing them to strategically allocate those between different actions. And this system created a balance of the chance that comes with a tabletop game and very careful planning. The plot of the game, in general, this is not exactly what it, but the central conceit is that you are playing a sleeper, and a sleeper is an emulated consciousness in a synthetic body that is owned by a corporation. And in the first game, you were a sleeper. You were fleeing from the corporation that owned them, and there are a number of things that they don't take a specific, like a medication or a drug, then their bodies start to deteriorate. And yeah, pretty big hit, critical darling. And now we have a sequel that released on the 28th of January, and it's Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector. So it expands the scope of the original. You're no longer confined to a single settlement. It's now you are going to different systems and colonies. The player can assemble a crew and take on contracts while evading a relentless pursuer. So, Aleks, I wanted to talk to you about this because you were a pretty big fan of Citizen Sleeper 1.
Yeah, it was actually my first review for the site. A little bit after it came out, it actually got some like free DLC expansions. The original that Gareth Damian Martin very generously just gave to their fans, and that really built on like kind of the foundation of the game. Brought like a whole new sort of like end game segment. So when those DLC all dropped, I gave the game a review. Had a really positive impression of it. Thought the expansion stuff ended up even like fixing some of the potential issues I'm sure people had playing the game before that came out. So it was a super positive experience overall with that game, and it made a really strong impression. So when the sequel got announced, and I was sort of paying attention to all the ways that Gareth Damian Martin was planning to expand on this formula and kind of reinvent it in a way, particularly with the introduction of companions now. I was super excited, and this game really just fulfilled my expectations like exactly as I hoped.
Yeah, you gave the original an 88, and you praised its role-playing mechanics, its cyberpunk-esque world, and its writing. But you did also mention that navigating the world could be a little bit tedious, and dialogue choices never really felt super impactful, aside from the DLC, as you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask, how is the sequel, Starward Vector, building on the ideas of its predecessor, and where does it evolve that towards to create a much more, I guess, expansive and interesting experience.
I mean, the first, I guess I could start with answering that question about like the sort of frustration I had navigating the world in the original game, because I mean it really does feel like pretty intuitive. It's like a visual novel, so like the interface is pretty well presented, not super cluttered. The way the game world is sort of depicted is just through like these pretty simple like 3D models, but that still provide like sort of a sense of setting. And in the first game, you're kind of just on one setting. You really get to know the place. It's called Erlin's Eye, and you meet a bunch of different like characters trying to sort of make their way out of like very dire circumstances. There's not a lot of hope in this world.
Seems like a very dystopian universe.
Yeah. It all takes place in space, but it's like a vision of space after like aggressive colonization and then like a huge just collapse of technology that sort of has everybody stranded in these different parts of space on like kind of like either like space rocks or like dilapidated like machinery. So it's all like creates like a really unique cyberpunk atmosphere, while also dealing with like an overall lore that circles around like a few corporations that pretty much have all the power and control of these different like settlements without having like direct influence on them necessarily. And so it ends up creating like a really cool lore, and the second one definitely builds off that as well. But in terms of just the navigation, the fact that Citizen Sleeper 2, as you said, doesn't take place on one settlement, but you actually have a ship now. You get a rig pretty much at the beginning of the game, and you get to sort of explore space a little bit, see a bunch of different settlements, how they're sort of dealing with this dystopian post-corporate sort of atmosphere and world, and that creates
what
like
that's like.
Yeah. I mean, like realistically, like if there's going to be a space dystopia in a couple hundred years, I think it's going to look pretty similar to this. So really, really grounded world building, all things considered. But
I mean,
yeah,
that's
like
the best sci-fi. The best sci-fi always
exactly.
speaks to what's currently happening.
Exactly. And a lot of cyberpunk, not getting off on a tangent here, but a lot of cyberpunk like is sort of still indebted to like the cyberpunk novels that were huge in like the 80s. And so like a lot of it still plays on that sort of retro futurism. But Citizen Sleeper, what I really appreciate about this is it feels so much more grounded in like the issues that are prevalent in our world today, and creating a dystopia that feels like it could happen still.
A plausible reality.
Yes.
As we said in the very first game, it was you were stuck to a single location really, and it was much more, I guess, individual survival. There were other characters obviously, but it was your survival. Now, what this game does is push it towards more of a camaraderie situation where you have companions working together as a crew and flying around all of these different systems and things. So, how did that shift in focus change the general feel of the game?
Yeah, so what I appreciate about these two games is like continuous is that they both manage to tell like a different kind of story and have different sorts of core mechanics that support that specific story, despite the fact that otherwise their presentation is very similar. So the first game was you were alone all the time. You did quests kind of for characters and in some cases with characters, but you were kind of just working on your own alongside them rather than really being like part of a team. So you were trying to survive, they were trying to survive, and you just found like kind of like a mutual sort of practical bond out of that. But what makes this game really special as a continuation of that is that you get your rig very early on. You escape from a pretty evil person at the beginning of the game who's trying to basically control you even more than like a sleeper is normally controlled by the fact that they need to take that drug, the stabilizer, to maintain their body. But the experiment this person is doing on you, Lane, it goes wrong, and it gives you a chance to escape with a human who he also has captive. and the two of you steal a ship, and you're off to space from there. So that's your first sort of bond, and you have like you end up at like a nearby settlement that you get to explore a bit through using your action dice and whatnot. You meet some other characters, and you start going on these special missions called contracts, which are, I guess, the most important addition to this game, and that really support it both in terms of like gameplay and narrative. So while you're exploring the overworld still alone for the most part, as you would be in the first game, when you go on contracts, you go with up to 2 allies to take with you. So these contracts all relate to specific story moments, usually connected to one of the recruitable characters, and provide like a really dynamic vehicle for experiencing these survival-based, chance-based systems that the gameplay really thrives on. So usually the contracts all have this sort of event timer kind of thing called a crisis. So these will appear during contracts and basically make it that it's extra important that you don't use careless dice rolls that could risk giving you like a bad outcome, because it will increase like the crisis level. And so like this creates like a really stressful environment that can be a lot of fun and stressful at the same time. And you're sort of working with these other characters to try to make the best out of the dice that you roll for each cycle. You only can really realistically stay on a contract for a couple of cycles, because you can bring these resources called supplies on the contract. But otherwise, if you run out of supplies, it starts increasing this new stat called stress. So you and your companions all have their own stress levels, and if your companions fill up on stress with bad dice rolls, they will just be out of the contract, which is a really bad negative to have, because then you just have less dice to use. But if your sleeper ends up getting a lot of stress and they have a higher stress tolerance than the companions, they will actually their dice will start becoming damaged. And then you could actually lose dice. And so again, like you're just getting less and less actions to be able to use per cycle. And so if things go wrong on a contract, it can really, it's actually like really exciting gameplay, but also like you could really end up having some bad story outcomes. So I think with the addition of contracts, Citizen Sleeper 2, just the gameplay is on a whole other level from the first game and integrates its companions really, really seamlessly in that process.
You talk about the stress for the various characters, but contracts can also be extremely stressful for you, the player, because unlike a lot of RPGs, these are not. You cannot just go back to an earlier thing after the contract is done. Game auto saves, and that story beat, I guess, is now locked into the narrative, which is an interesting choice to make as a designer of a video game now, because people, I mean, there's save scumming, there's going back, there's retrying all these different choices. But in this particular case, that's not really an option. It's a key part of the game that what happens, and you need to adapt to that.
Yep. So even from the first game, like this game is auto-saving constantly, like a Souls game pretty much. It's like every single dice action you slot and you get an outcome, boom, automatically an autosave. You can't go back. You can't save in a separate save file. It's just everything about the design of this game around the save system is to disincentivize save scumming and to ask you as a player to just accept the consequences of what happens, which is really just the consequences of chance, because you get a random 5 dice at the beginning of each cycle. You might just get all 1s and 2s, and you're like, what am I even supposed to do with this? But you could still be strategic within that sort of luck-based design. So it's just really smart, tight design in general. But I personally appreciate the lack of save scumming, because sometimes in an RPG, even though I want to just accept actions that happen and kind of roll with the role playing of that, just having the option is sometimes too hard to resist. So I really enjoy that they do that. What I will say about the difficulty in general, though, is so I was pretty motivated to complete pretty much everything in this game because it's all good content. There's good writing behind all of it. All of it either provides some insight into the world, your sleeper, or one of your companions. So it ultimately all feels like part of the core experience, which is great. But doing everything, I was able to pretty much get like positive outcomes from everything because I was just well stacked in resources. But I really appreciate that there is a higher difficulty level called Dangerous, which I'm going to probably use on every replay of this game I do, because it adds like permadeath. So like if you completely run out of all your sleeper's dice, like you're done your playthrough. And also just it increases like your intake of stress, like the way stress builds up. So I imagine that will just lead to like more failed contracts and just make for a more kind of intense role playing experience that I'm quite interested in having all the way through.
Yeah, the in the first game, I understand that your condition based on how much of the drug, the stabilizer drug you have, that was the limiting factor in the game. Here it's stress. I'm curious how stress works in the game outside of that. Like, basically, how do you de-stress? How do you lower your stress level?
Right. So I mean, stress is really only gonna kill you on a contract unless you're just like deliberately not taking care of your sleeper. Because the way you like stress is also connected to this other stat called energy, which is basically are you eating? So on every settlement, there's usually a restaurant you could go to. If there's no restaurant, you're relying on your reservoir of supplies, that resource I mentioned, which you can only have up to 5 of at any given time. And so to keep your energy up, which is depleted both through every cycle and often through failed dice rolls, that will start going down. But if you're not on a contract, you can very easily boost boost your energy by eating, or decrease your stress by just resting in your ship, using your dice for that purpose, rather than using your dice to do actions around whatever settlement you're currently at.
Eating at a restaurant is a good example of, I guess, the different locations in the game, because as we mentioned, first game just had the one location. Now there are multiples here, and each settlement, they're very unique. They have their own economy, providing different, I guess, perks. Different settlements have different things. Like some might have cheaper fuel, or others might require labor for resources. So for you, how did this variation between the various settlements, I guess, direct the game for you, where you're heading, essentially?
Right. So, I mean, as like many RPGs, like you don't get access to like the entirety of the world right off the bat. Like as you're going to like you like zoom out onto like the overall map of the Starward Belt, which is like the setting of the game where multiple of the settlements are distributed. And there will be like barriers there's like a toxic sort of atmosphere, so you can't cross this part of the map until you get like an upgrade for your ship that allows it to survive in that kind of atmosphere. So the game does a good job sort of giving you basically one tutorial settlement to get a feel for the game, opening up to a couple more that you can kind of visit at your own pace, discover quests, slot in dice to explore and look at more kind of individual locations within that settlement. But while also keeping you semi-directed in terms of like progressing like a main story and not letting you get too distracted by just sheer exploration. And on top of that, the
lane
villain
is constantly chasing
exactly
you, right?
Yeah, the villain lane is always there. So basically how that works is when you stay at a new settlement, you'll see this like red timer around your ship, which fills up with each new cycle, and you can't let that fill up all the way, or lane will find you. But it decreases by 3 every time you go to a new settlement. So that incentivizes you to stay on the move a little bit, and yeah, while also like fitting very well in with the overall story progression.
One of the things, I mean, it sounds like this game really did expand. It, it sounds like it put quite a bit of Mass Effect into the already existing world of Citizen Sleeper, in terms of choices, party-based mechanics, that sort of thing. But something that remained relatively the same was the UI and the general design, graphic design of the game. Frankly speaking, I mean, and this is not a criticism by any means, they reused a lot when making this game. There are new assets and there are new character portraits. The character portraits, by the way, are gorgeous.
Oh my god, amazing illustrator, yeah.
Yeah, very, very comic book style. Like it's just really, really cool stuff. And as you said earlier, the 3D models it's an interesting look. Like they're very simple, but they're not simple in the sense of like N64 or PlayStation era limited number of polygons. They are stylized simple, which provides a very nice contrast to both the character portraits and the UI. My point is that there's a lot of recycling that went into this game, and I imagine that that's what allowed them to get this out as fast as it did.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, like I always appreciate when a developer is just able to use asset reuse smartly, while also just iterating in ways that will fundamentally change the experience, not aesthetically necessarily, but design wise. And that really seemed to be the focus here, is just what are changes to the design that could make for a longer experience. For one thing, like this game is pretty much double the length of its predecessor in terms of my playtime. I completed both games, so it was like 10 hours ish to complete Citizen Sleeper, and almost 20 to complete Citizen Sleeper 2. But otherwise, it's just like fine tuning the systems, creating balance around the feel of the contracts, and writing the companions and all that, and all those like careful iterations and ways of expanding the game just created like a distinct experience. Like I said, like Citizen Sleeper 1 felt very isolated, almost like noirish in terms of like the atmosphere I just felt while playing the game, even though the general aesthetics and presentation are the same. And then with the way the storytelling works in this game, and the mechanics and all that, there's more of this focus on groups, on your team, getting to know your team, working with your team, and yeah, they felt like distinct experiences despite otherwise looking so similar.
The other aspect of the game for its presentation would be the music. And in your review, well, you say the music is really good. It's, very chill, very appropriate. It does, unfortunately, or more accurately, it unfortunately doesn't really underscore a lot of, literally doesn't underscore a lot of the action in the game, because it's not a fully dynamic soundtrack. So key moments don't always have unique music to underscore that and boost up the emotional stakes. In general, what do you think of the music? Like, did it work except for those moments?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's pretty much like, it sounds so similar to the first game, and the first game had an incredible soundtrack. If I were to just put it on in the background, just wanting to listen to some electronic instrumentals, I would enjoy it. But the fact that it's just sort of the same approach this time around, I'd say was my biggest negative on the game. Not that the music quality deteriorated, but for one thing, like if somebody played me a song from the first game and from the second game, I wouldn't be able to tell you which game it's from, which is, I mean, it would be good if there was some sort of distinguishing feature there. But also, yeah, the fact that the game is so much longer, but you're still just getting sort of a shuffling soundtrack, makes it get a little old, even though it's still nice to listen to. And there is actually one contract late in the game, sort of like the last main contract, that has its own unique song. And when that hit, I was just like, oh my God, I'm ready for this. This is amazing. And if just all the contracts, or at least some of them, had that same thing going for it, that the audio shifted as well to like create a character for that part of the story, that would be so cool. So yeah, it's my one minor con on an otherwise very good game.
Yeah, that seems like something that could be put into the third game. A little bit more attention to a little bit more of a dynamic and interesting soundtrack to really underscore the emotional moments.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I've checked out some of it. It sounds, like you said, it's very chill. It's very much like a if there could be a meme of a sleeper with the headphones and the girl studying meme, that would be fairly appropriate.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I've actually seen this summer. I never mentioned this in the podcast. I saw the movie that had the original meme, A Whisper of the Heart, and God, it was good.
Oh yeah, that movie's great.
Oh, it's so good.
It's great.
It's so great. Anyway, that was unrelated. I just pictured the actual like image of the sleeper just with the giant headphones on. I wanted to ask you, we're going to wrap this up because we need to move on to Tales of Grace. Tales of Grace's F Remastered. But this is going to be probably one of your standout RPG experiences of 2025. And I mean, it happened very early in 2025, which is a nice thing. Hopefully it's not forgotten, because a lot of things in January, can be forgotten by the end of the year. Because, there's a lot of things that happen in a year. There's a lot of things that happen in January, for God's sake. So what about this? Do you think, let's project ourselves forward. Let's put it, we're December. We're coming up with the games of the year list. What to you would make Citizen Sleeper 2 stand out as one of the most compelling RPGs of the year?
So definitely just how unique of a world this game is. Like both Citizen Sleepers present like one of the most unique, imaginative, and like politically relevant sci-fi settings I've seen in a video game in a while. So I think that's a big standout. The fact that like most people who play RPGs are really attracted to the genre because of characters, and this game has that appeal more than the first game, without question. Like you meet so many cool characters and get to recruit them, like a big sort of physically burly mercenary called Eugene. You get this like little hacker kid called Junie. That this cast is so good, so diverse, so interesting, and interact with each other in fun little ways. So I think, that this overall like lore of it, the new kind of focus on characters, and also just being like one of these RPGs that prefer like kind of non-action, non-violent based gameplay, instead kind of revolving around these super creative tabletop systems. Like it's becoming more of a thing ever since Disco Elysium became a global phenomenon, and this is one of the best like successors to that kind of RPG experience, I think.
That's really nice to hear.
I say it's funny because it's kind of giving me the feeling of, from the way you describe it, of something like The Expanse, with a small, tiny crew of people and a hard, nihilistic kind of universe. It might not be exactly the same setting, but it has that kind of same feeling to it for me.
Actually, yeah. If Mass Effect is like the Star Trek of video games, like calling this The Expanse of video games is a really good way to put it. Yeah, no doubt.
That's a really good way to put it. I think that something that it seems to be in this game and in those kind of stories, it very much is a found family kind of dynamic where you gather the people around you who you identify with and form literally a found family. And stories like The Expanse, I guess if we're going to go into more sci-fi on a ship in a dystopian galaxy, maybe Firefly, for example, or Mass Effect. That kind of dynamic works extraordinarily well in science fiction and in other, fantasy settings as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like the Mass Effect comparison like is out there. I think Martin even made it themselves. But one twist I saw them put on that in an interview is that like this is a game taking from Mass Effect, but is also sort of like an anti-Mass Effect by not being like based on like a power fantasy where you're the captain and everybody worships you and respects you ultimately and listens to what you have to say. Like when you go to arrive at like a new settlement in this game, maybe like a character will just be like, hey, I have some business to take care of here, so bye. And then maybe that's your pilot, and so you're just stuck on the settlement until like they deal with their business. So like it does a good job while making you feel like agency around your companions, not making you like the star of the show and like an object of worship. And I think that's also like a really nice twist on the formula.
I think you're right. Okay, well, let's move on now to another game that I've never played it, but I understand it has. I mean, it has two real family members, but there are some found family members here too. Tales of Grace's F Remastered. So this has a bit of an interesting history. I imagine that most people listening know the Tales series. It's a long-running JRPG franchise by Bandai Namco. But despite the fact that it uses all the trappings of a turn-based RPG, it actually uses action-oriented combat. So same deep party mechanics and narrative focus of classic RPGs, but much more action-oriented battles, which is really, really cool because up until very recently, it allowed you to kind of do couch co-op where someone could take charge of other members of the party and fight. The series began with Tales of Phantasia in '95 on the Super Famicom. Unfortunately, the first title never made it west until, almost over 10 years later on the GBA. There was a fan translation, as many people in here know, a rather controversial one. I played that. That's the first Tales game I ever played. But through the late '90s and the 2000s, the Tales series kind of exploded. Really became a prolific series on PlayStation and GameCube. And eventually, it finally made its way to the Wii. However, it did not make its way to the West. It was, stuck in Japan, and finally, a few years later, it was re-released as Tales of Grace's F for the PS3 in 2010, and that added some gameplay differences. I think it added some more storylines, maybe an epilogue. And now, because Bandai Namco is making an effort to really, preserve their older Tales titles, they have released Tales of Grace's F Remastered. So this is a full remaster of the PlayStation version of the game. So all the content there is still here. And yeah, it's a 15-year-old game, but it certainly has its fans. And I think that one of them is you, Paul.
Yes, that's right. I really liked what I got to experience there, and it's interesting because, as you say, it's from 2010, and at the time, for some reason, I did not jump onto the PS3 generation, so I missed this entirely. And my experience of the Tales games in general was not massive, but from one perspective, I thought that was an ideal way to approach this, because I think there's going to be two audiences for this game. One is going to be, as you say, dedicated fans returning to it to see this older title return in a much more beautiful fashion and with great performance and visuals. And the other is going to be those like myself who never found it originally, who were just intrigued by these older titles and the ability to go back and revisit some of our history, which I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this year, aren't we, with titles like Suikoden and Luna, so much on the horizon. And you can see that in two different ways, but I appreciate it.
Are there even any new games anymore? I
don't know. Yeah, maybe not this year. But yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to play it.
One of the coolest things about this is, as I said, it originated on the Wii, and I'm not using this as an insult, I swear to God, but looking at screenshots and gameplay footage, boy, this looks like a game that was on the Wii. There is something about the Nintendo Wii's graphical capabilities that it's almost easy to go, that's a Wii game. And this is one of them. I know this is a remaster of the PlayStation 3 one, but it has this vaguely simplistic, cartoony anime quality to it that is very representative of a lot of games that came out on the Nintendo Wii back in the late 2000s. How did you feel about that in terms of the way they remastered and updated the graphics? So it doesn't look quite as I guess they would definitely updated the resolution of it, but so it looks more like a modern day game. But how am I trying to say this? It's a remaster, and how do they make the 15-year-old character models look accessible and good in today's today's world.
Yeah, it's kind of a remaster of a remaster, isn't it? Really, and I think, as you say there, the first impression is of that extremely great heightened resolution, clarity, the vibrant colors. To such an extent that you can kind of take a step back from the fact that these character models, they're obviously not what we would maybe see even in a more cuter kind of TV game nowadays. They're obviously a little bit more basic, but having seen a lot worse examples of that style, I think they've done the character designers did a great job originally, I think, and that has helped.
Good design lasts forever.
Yeah, and there's some really, and it's very Talesy design work. Obviously,
it really is. This coat is something. The coat of the main character is something else.
Yeah, big flappy coat with the symbol, and there it's fantastic.
Also, it's also very representative of the late 2000s. And how many buckles can we put on this piece of clothing?
Yeah, and Sophie's giant pigtails standing out either side of her head. In an improbable fashion as well. It's great. I love it. A
lot of use of very, very vibrant colors.
Yeah, absolutely. That really struck me. And I think moving aside from the character models themselves, I think as put in the review, there was just a section right at the beginning where they go to a bluff and they look at the sky, and so it just even for something that is obviously based on an older title, it just really struck me. It was really quite beautiful, and there's quite a few moments like that within the game. It is there is some great design work within it. You're going to be going to some traditional type settings. You got your Iceland and your hot place and things like that. But they managed to put an intriguing spin on it each time, enough that you're not feeling like you've seen this 1,000 times before and you don't want to see it again. And it was enough to bring me through right to the end and not feel dissatisfied at any point during that journey.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned in the review is this game was released on the Wii and eventually the PlayStation 3 in a very specific period of the Tales franchise, the middle years almost. Like it's long after the Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 era. We're even past the PlayStation 2. We're on the PlayStation 3. Eventually, we're going to get into the modern day iterations with Tales of Arise. But this is from an earlier era. And I'm curious, how do you best think this represents those middle years of the Tales series in terms of the gameplay and design?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think you mentioned how the trappings of a turn-based JRPG, everything apart from the turn-based nature itself. So when you go into a fight, obviously you're not on the field. You're going straight into a different environment, in a way that they later on in titles like Tales of Zestiria, and obviously the most recent ones, Tales of Arise, you'll do it straight on the battlefield. So it's still got that kind of framework to it. But it's done away with the kind of side-scrolling nature, I think, of some of the earliest titles from what I'm aware of. And the battle system itself, the battles are just really, really great in the sense of the speed and ferocity of most of them. You jump in, you immediately, whether you're going to be doing your complicated combination attacks or if you're just going to go in and hammer away, which does work sometimes, not all the time, depending on the approach you want to take. Yeah, you can do that. It doesn't work. It's not the best, but you can. But either way, you're in and you're out really, really quickly, which is a fantastic kind of feeling, because it doesn't give you that sense of the grind in a negative sense. It's really enjoyable. It's an enjoyable game loop, and I didn't find. I mean, obviously, with this modern release, we've got all the kind of upgrades we're used to now, such as the ability to turn off the encounters if you want to, or do all kinds of other things in the background. But I didn't find myself using that really, or having too much of a desire to use that, because it just all the time it feels like you want to engage with this system. Yeah, I mean, some of the battles are going to be longer. Obviously, your boss encounters do take much more thought and time than you could, because as you would expect. But again, none of them really outstay their welcome, I would say.
Yeah, you kind of hinted towards this in what you just said there, but there's a thing called the grade shop, which apparently was an unlock in the original, not the original, it was an unlock in earlier versions of the game. But here it's available right from the top. And essentially what this is you can buy quality of life from doubling your or tripling your experience. I think you can trade all of your experience for gold at some point, increase movement. Like, there's a lot of options that you can get here. Did you find yourself taking advantage of any of those? I guess, did you go on a shopping spree in the grade shop, essentially?
I've played around with it. But in general, I didn't use it too much, because being someone coming to it for the first time, I want to get the feel of the balance and the mechanics the way that you would have done originally, or the way that the designers intended. But at the same time, I really appreciate it. I think it's a fantastic feature to unlock that for people who might be coming back to it, who just have fond memories of it and want to maybe they want to blast through it again to experience that narrative one more time. Or for new players who might be a bit intimidated by the systems and the kind of complexity. There is an air of complexity to some of the battling that some might find intimidating. So having that ability to change and modify the game in that way, I think, is very beneficial, and is probably something other studios doing remasters should take heed of and should definitely incorporate where they can.
I imagine that it'd be great for essentially kids, because one of the nice things about these games, and this is again been gone in the recent ones, is the fact that there is multiplayer combat. You can go in, you can give a controller to someone. There's no multiplayer outside of combat. Like, the person with the main controller is the one controlling the person around the field. But when you get in combat, you can, kind of play it together. And I think that'd be really, really great for parents and kids. And to assist in that, you also could use the grade system, the grade shop, to lower the difficulty for them.
Yes, you can. That's really interesting. I think the structure of it is really interesting, from the sense of how JRPGs, how can we make JRPGs, how can we make them collaborative sometimes? What with it being the typical framework of it being quite solitary. And it's an interesting compromise, as you say, that we're able to take the battles and join with somebody else, whereas other times I suppose your secondary person is going to be sitting there not doing very much, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, as a way of introducing other people, I said maybe children, maybe people who don't game as much, giving them an opportunity to take part. That's great, because my own children love to watch me as I sort of fight my way through the E series. So I guess really having the ability to say, okay, right at this stage, you can actually step in with me as well, might heighten the experience even more. So, I haven't sort of taken advantage of that with this title yet, but I think I've got a feeling I might go back to it and maybe play it in that way. That could be a good time.
Yeah. Well, you also don't need to play multiplayer to get the most out of it, because you can switch between your characters on the fly. And I imagine that is a vital component for the strategy of the game. Yes,
you can instantly switch between each of your party members, and they individually, and depending on how you've leveled up and what sort of skills you've acquired, they've each got different strengths and weaknesses, different abilities to hit the different creature types. Each enemy that you come across is put into sort of different types, like beast, man, and things like that. And your movements as your movements are strong against those different types, and you'll find that each you will want to be moving between your characters in order to take advantage of that. Because again, if you do try and button mash or do something like that, you'll probably get through eventually, particularly if you've managed to level up. But generally, if you can target those specific weaknesses, you're going to be firing up huge modifiers, and you'll see the numbers spiraling into the heavens, and that's what you really want.
Well, that's the fun of playing a JRPG, is watching the enemies bleed numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. You want those quadruple nines flying everywhere. That's for sure. I think I did mention in the review though as well that it can mean that when each encounter, especially if you're coming across different monsters, you're having to analyze them to see what the weaknesses are, and then you're kind of having to memorize which of your characters are effective against that particular weakness, and also their particular moveset to activate that. And that might be a combination of principally your two different buttons that you're hitting that control two different art types. But you're kind of hitting them and moving the joystick to access different abilities, and depending on the combination of the movements that you do, you'll access different ones. So there's a lot of memorizing going, and then probably you're going to be flipping backwards and forwards between that if you really want it to be effective every time. And I think, as I've already said, that's it's good. And I think if you want to delve deep into that complexity, that's it's going to give it some it's going to mean you keep coming back to that experience. But at the same time, if you're getting to a stage at points where you think, I just really want to get through this, then it can slow things down. You're not forced to do it, so I wouldn't really ever mark it down for that, because I think for some people it is a massive bonus. But it is something to be aware of, definitely, when you're playing it.
The combat in this game, as I understand it, looking online, a lot of fans consider this to be one of the S tier levels of combat in the Tales games, this combat system. Unfortunately, something that drops down to the B tier might just be the soundtrack. Now, saying it's B tier does not say it's bad. B is a very good grade. But as you say in your review, it's more workmanlike. It works. It supports the game's atmosphere. However, it's not super memorable as compared to some of the other Tales soundtracks, including, of course, the opening song.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the first time that I heard White Light from Tales of Zestiria, I think many of us can identify with this. I thought, wow, this is amazing. That absolutely. And I think we've other members of the team have spoken about this on Rhythm Encounter before as well. It really, it's almost better than what you're going to experience next, but it does set you up for it massively. And I think the song is from Tales of Berseria. I think it's Burn. That one's really good as well. Again, really firing you up. And this one, the song from Graces, it's like perfectly acceptable sort of J-pop style. It's good, but
it's good.
It's good. It's all right. And the rest of the soundtrack follows along in that suit, I think. There are a couple of highlights to it, definitely. But generally you're not going to be astounded by what you're hearing. And there are occasions where it does get a bit repetitive. You have the same few notes just going over and over and over again. Nothing egregious, and there's enough variety there that you're not going to be too upset. But I definitely wouldn't be firing this into the upper echelons of JRPG soundtracks.
But perfectly good.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, much like the game, you enjoyed it. You gave it an 85. 85, very, very good score, especially for a remaster of a 15-year-old game.
Yeah.
Did this game make you want to revisit any future Tales titles? Like what you mentioned that your experience with the series, you have some, but not a ton. Did this make you want to visit, I guess, the most recent one, Arise?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had my eyes on that for a long time anyway, but just to be able to see the evolution from Graces all the way through to Arise, I'd be absolutely grateful to for that opportunity to do that, and to see what's coming next as well. I think, as we've already mentioned, they have with Rise. I'm aware that they threw away the co-op nature of it.
Yes, there were some complaints about that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and I feel that I know that it's kind of similar in a way to what they've done to the later Mana entry, like the remake of Trials of Mana and of course Visions of Mana. Now none of them are cooperative, which my wife was a little bit upset about when she learned that, because we actually, I know not many people are massive fans of that Secret of Mana remake. I know it's got some issues, but we did start off playing that together. So having that removed from the later entries is a bit of a shame, but I suppose as we were discussing earlier, these things probably are easier to design as solitary experiences. So I can understand why the Tales series is moving down that route. I don't know if either of you have played Rise at all, and Rise. I don't know why I keep calling it Rise. It does seem to be moving down that sort of the darker storytelling as well. And there's Tales of Graces has its moments, but I think it's got that kind of Saturday morning innocence to it that maybe Bandai Namco are feeling like they need to move away from slightly as the series continues.
Possibly. Well, thank you very much for playing this, and thank you both for playing both of these games. It sounds like January is usually a bit of a desert, but it seems like there were some real standout releases this month, which bodes well for the rest of the year in terms of video games. But now, I mean, Paul, you just said that speaking of another thing that's pivoting away from multiplayer towards single-player games, we're going to do our discussion question now, and I would say that one of the biggest stories of 2025 is the fallout of the failure of many live service games in 2024. Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, for example, can be bought for on sale for $1.50 now. Concord, you can't even buy anymore. It was taken off the shelves. So many publishers over the course of the 2000s and late 2010s took their best single player developers and they forced them into live service games because everyone wanted their own Fortnite. I guess before Fortnite, everyone wanted their own PUBG. Unfortunately, it turns out that there really only can be one Fortnite at a time. And as long as Fortnite is churning out new content and expanding things and actually is in active development, knocking it off its throne is really, really hard. Difficult to impossible, I would say. And in the past few weeks, we've heard a lot of stories coming out that Sony has finally come to terms with this spectacular miscalculation to divert millions upon millions of dollars and presumably hundreds of talented game developers and dozens of studios that could have been producing exceptionally good single-player experiences. They are finally moving away from that. Unfortunately, it does mean that we've gotten some cancellations. They've canceled the very first new game from developer Bluepoint. Bluepoint was responsible for the Demon's Souls remake a few years ago, and they have the hand on a lot of other remakes. They were going to be developing their very first game, and it was going to be a live service game. Nope. Sony canceled a God of War live service game, and they've also recently canceled a Horizon Zero Dawn live service game. So the Horizon series was supposed to have one. I have no problem with them canceling these games, but I wanted to ask your opinions on this because there has to be, like I said, hundreds of millions of dollars, countless hours that have been invested into these live service games by spectacularly talented developers. My heart breaks for them because they spent all of this time working on this and their work will not be seen. If they're lucky, it will be recycled into something else. But for a lot of them, that work's never going to be seen. And it also breaks my heart because, like I said, we could have been denied some amazing video games, all because Sony, and not just Sony, countless other publishers, so dramatically misread this moment in video game history. I just wanted to ask your thoughts about all of this coming out, and what do you think the future will be for live service games, for the next trend chase, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of echo your thoughts there. The looking at these things and these announcements, there, I could see originally they weren't generally the sorts of games that I was going to be interested in, live service, Concord, etc. And I don't, but I didn't want to be hostile towards them because of that. Because obviously, there's people who really enjoy it.
Not everything is for me.
Exactly. But when this happened, starting with Concord, my initial thoughts is, as yours, there's people who have worked on this, voice actors, writers, composers, who've probably worked on this for so many years, and then within 2 weeks, everything they've done is disappeared forever, just years and years and years of their lives. And it reminded me a bit of, I think it's Warner Brothers and Batgirl.
I wanted to say, Zaslav's purging of content.
Yeah, which happened earlier and was, to me, equally horrifying.
Well, I mean, that's been continuing with works that have been released. I mean, I think there's a Scooby-Doo movie that's never been released. There's Coyote versus Acme, the live action cartoon hybrid movie will never get a release. And there are countless shows on Max that have just vanished. He is a big fan of killing content, and what happened with Concord is kind of spookily similar to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of, I think, the greatest tragedies. But at the same time, I suppose with the Bluepoint and Bend story, as far as we know at the moment, anyway, there hasn't been the massive layoffs and studio closures that happened in the wake of Concord.
Bluepoint might be able to avoid it because of their specialty being remastering. It turns out that, as we just talked about, remastering games is a pretty popular trend in gaming right now. So they are so talented at it and have such a good track record that they might survive to do that. I think there's a lot of value there.
No, I was just going to say, were they using was the entire studio focused on that God of War Ragnarok project, or is there something else that might be coming down the line, possibly?
Yeah. I mean, the thing I'm mostly thinking about is just like, and you alluded to this, Paul, it's just like, this type of video game, like a live service multiplayer game, like it doesn't appeal to me. And like, I feel the same way about myself too. You know who else like kind of might feel that way is like the developers themselves.
Yeah.
Like these decisions like must be made by like the most out of touch people on the goddamn planet. 'Cause like good games are ultimately like artistic products made by passionate people. And these publishers are forcing these developers, like sometimes established specialist developers, away from their passions. So like, why would the result be good? Why is a company that's known for their high quality remakes or remasters of classic single player games making a live service game? Why was Arcane, who make these amazing single player immersive sims, put on a live service game like Redfall? Why was BioWare, a company known for single player story driven games, put on Anthem? Like it just doesn't make any sense. And it's like, not only like are these out of touch for like the specific players, but it's just like, I can't imagine the developers would be happy about these choices being essentially forced away from what they're good at and what they're passionate about to be making something else. Because like you can be passionate about a multiplayer game too. Like we see that with the success of Helldivers 2 last year. Like that company like did so much with the idea of a live service game because they cared and they had ideas, and that's kind of what drove them. So like, instead putting like these specialist teams towards something that they don't have experience with, aren't passionate about, and then seeing like all these failures that lead to job layoffs, it's like, go figure.
Yeah. And professionals aren't stupid. Like I can't tell you the number of times years ago when I was an actor and I'd be in rehearsal for a show And I would go home and I'd be like, this is bad. This is going to be bad.
Mhm.
Like, there's something wrong here. I don't know how to fix it. Clearly, no one knows how to fix it. This is going to be a disaster. And that knowledge sucks because you still have a job to do. You still have to work on it. Like, I guarantee that the artists at Rocksteady knew exactly what was happening within like 4 years of development of Suicide Squad.
Mhm.
Like, there's no way they did not know that this was going to be a disaster. Maybe they hoped it wasn't going to be as big a disaster as it turned out to be, but like, they know what they're doing, and they can read the room, and they can think this isn't going to work, and that's got to be heartbreaking for them.
Yeah, because there's talent there and there's passion, and it's just being steered in the completely wrong direction.
Oh God, Suicide Squad drives me crazy because I look at the general pieces of it. I look at like the Justice League Museum. I look at the design of Metropolis, and I'm thinking this could have been like not repurposed, but if this was the direction the game was going for a Superman game or a Justice League game or something like that was single player, that could have been so amazing because you see the artistry there and you see the work, and it's just wasted.
Yeah, and it's chasing something that, you know, it already exists, hasn't got away. I mean, that Fortnite's still there, Minecraft is still there. If you tried to prize my children away from Minecraft, you would have a fight on your hands. So the idea that people are that there's a high likelihood that your new IP is going to prize people away from it. I mean, there's always a chance, but is it a chance that you want to bet the farm on, essentially? And Sony, from what we're aware, I think they announced even, didn't they, had bet the farm 12 times. They had 12 live service games that they were playing. That was a few years ago what they mentioned.
Which is beyond stupid.
Because you're competing with yourself at that point. Like,
I know. Well, that's the thing. They all want the big whale. They think, well, maybe one of these games is going to hit, and we're going to replace Fortnite, and that's going to be the money train. And it's like, yeah, but you have 12 games that you're investing in hundreds of millions of dollars probably into each game. Like, do you have any idea how big a whale you would have to land to pay that off?
And we mentioned Helldivers, which of course has been a massive success. But
out of nowhere,
and that's amazing. But is there any chance that has recouped any of the development costs on something like Concord? I think it's very unlikely,
especially the way they were treating it after they treated that thing horribly after it released. They didn't want it to be a success. It was, and I think they were angry about it in a weird way.
Yeah, particularly I suppose with it. It's not a first party thing with theirs, is it? It's an exclusive, but I can see why there'd be a lot more investment and perhaps egos on the line with something like Concord succeeding than something like Helldivers. I can only just hope that with what we're seeing, that the positive side of these projects being cancelled is that there is maybe a turning of the ship, a change of direction, and that we will see a return to a greater focus on single player experiences, or at least really high quality multiplayer experiences that don't rely on that live service model.
Yeah. They all want the recurring revenue. They want the skins. They want the loot boxes. They want all of this crap. But I mean, unless people are invested in something super heavily, they're not going to spend the money. And it's because of that time investment. It's like games like Overwatch, games like Fortnite, because of the system of loot boxes, of getting various costumes, unlockables, things like that. It works very similarly to the model of Apple, of locking you into the ecosystem. Once you've spent that much money on a specific game, you want to keep playing that specific game unless there is a good reason not to. For any of these live service games that they had in development, it doesn't matter if one of them was brilliant. That's good. They might get a little bit of business out of that. But what they would have needed is Overwatch or Fortnite to spectacularly screw up in some way, lose their player base, so the player base would then migrate to the new platform, if we're talking about locking in to a specific ecosystem. And like, that's out of your control. That's chance. That depends on the people who are making the current successes. And frankly, it doesn't seem like, I know that Blizzard has made some missteps with Overwatch, but it doesn't seem in the long run to have hurt them tremendously. And then again, there are massive hits that can happen completely out of nowhere. The new Marvel Overwatch ripoff is doing amazingly. And like, it's a frigging Marvel IP extravaganza. Like, who could have guessed? And it's doing great.
And I think that was also, like, to an extent, like serendipity, because I think the success behind that game is partly because Overwatch 2 was kind of dropping the ball in some big ways. And so I'm sure, like, I'm not sure exactly the development timeline, but I wouldn't be surprised if, like, Concord was kind of in development along the same time as the Marvel one. And then the Marvel one, just with the brand, with coming out first, just like completely ripped any chance of a player base coming towards Concord.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Concord wanted so badly to be the MCU. It wanted so badly to be Guardians. It was transparent. And I mean, you know, there are worse ideas than ripping off successful IP, but like, they were ripping off a successful IP that had finished its initial trilogy and is at this point well over a decade old. Wow, there were some. I actually have I have significant problems with them memory holing Concord, with just getting rid of it altogether. But looking at it from a business point of view, I kind of understand it, because it was such a disaster.
It would be burning money right now, wouldn't it, if it was still on? I think it's in the millions, isn't it, just to keep it running, and then the development on it. It would have turned an absolute disaster into something, if it's even possible, even worse. So you can see it. And, you know, if it was released in a kind of single player format, I know it's certainly not within the coverage of ourselves, but would any of us or anyone we know actually want to buy it? Because it's so bland.
What's amazing about it is I remember the reveal, and all of us in the chat that were watching it were just like, what was that? Like, that was the most soulless trailer I've ever seen. It was an empty suit. It was weird just how incredibly blasé all of us were about this. And to be fair, everybody else as well, who has ever, you know, played a video game.
And they're not just asking you to say, oh, come here, spend this money and spend the next 12 to 15 hours with us. They're saying, come here, spend your money and spend the next year with us doing this.
This is your life now.
Yeah. That's the aim, isn't it? And who would? Yeah,
it's like the problem with live service games, and I guess the shell that's really difficult for them to crack is a good live service game almost becomes part of a gamer's identity, in a way that is very difficult to do. It requires not just a massive financial investment to make a good game, and it requires a tremendous amount of work to get them invested in that world, in that ecosystem, and make them watch that content, make them watch Let's Plays, make them watch tutorial guides. But like, there's so much that goes into it, and I can't believe that they had like this many of them in development. See, that's the malpractice here for me. It's not that they were trying to replicate Fortnite or they were trying to get a piece of that pie. Frankly, if they weren't, that would have been malpractice. If Sony had just been like, let's ignore this trend, that would have been stupid from a business perspective, because there's a good chance that trend might have continued and there's a chance they might have hit it. It's that they went all in on it, and they took all of these developers who could have been creating games that would have been making them money, and they diverted them all to live service. That was what blows my mind. Like, anyone could have seen this coming. And I bet a lot of people in Sony, even in positions of authority, saw this coming. I bet that they were just overruled by people in positions of authority above them.
Yeah, because there really is no logic behind these decisions. Like, what God of War fan would like a God of War live service game over a new God of War single player game? Like your IP isn't even helping you there. Like, you're just like, what are you doing?
And it's not just that. It's like, you're not going to be able to play as the characters you love in a live service game for the most part. Like, not everyone's going to be able to be Aloy. So you're going to be playing like as maybe one of her supporting cast, or worse, brand new characters. And like, yeah, you're in the world of Horizon and you're fighting dinosaur machines. Great. But like, the reason why you play those games is, a lot of it for me, is because it's friggin' Aloy.
Yeah.
or Kratos, or like any of these characters.
I would agree with that, and I think obviously those are mistakes they've made, but interesting enough, they've kind of compounded that by making the reverse mistake. I think with something that had already proven itself to be popular. So, like the Last of Us multiplayer, I think it's called Factions, was really hugely successful, and of course the sequel to that was being developed by Naughty Dog was also cancelled. So you think that they probably could have made that work. They probably could have made a good go at that. So it seems like there's no selection. There's no the thinking is definitely flawed almost everywhere throughout the whole project, and people are paying the price for it.
Yeah, I don't think that Fortnite, especially at this point, should be considered a game within the live service genre. Fortnite is so big at this point; it's like its own genre.
It's like a world.
It's a world. It's frankly speaking, it's what Meta had been going after with the metaverse. That's what they wanted, and it's a world in such a weird way because we all expected back in the very early 2010s and the 2000s that MMOs were going to be that. Turns out, no, not really.
Yeah,
so depressing.
Second Life or Metaverse or something.
Yeah, so depressing. Yeah, that would have been better if you could, if Zuck was in there and you could go down and hunt down Zuck for a chicken dinner. I think that would have been a big success nowadays. Anyway, thank you both very, very much for coming on and chatting about this rather heated topic, and you can tell it's heated because all three of us are like
yeah, just hopefully the lesson is learned sooner rather than later, because it's been 8 years since Anthem, and we're still trying projects like this. This is affecting too many people's lives at this point.
There will be live service games released in the future, but I think that perhaps the massive publishers have learned their lesson, and they finally I understand there's sunk cost fallacy. You keep dumping money into the hole. Hopefully the hole gets filled. And eventually most of these corporations realize, oh, the hole is still as deep as it always was. We got to get away from this. I think maybe the big ones have done that, but there'll be live service games in the future. And honestly, I don't think Fortnite will exist forever. I think something will come along to knock Fortnite off. Something's coming along to knock Twitter off. Something's come along to knock Facebook off. This always happens, but it takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually, like I said, it requires them to screw up, not you to succeed. So your timing has to be right. And Sony's timing was disastrously wrong here.
Yeah, and build from something smaller maybe, and don't put 99% of your resources into it.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so if you're looking for a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened up a store. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. We have lots of things in the store for you to buy. We have clothing, we have mugs, we have all kinds of things. We also have our collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, and this is the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. And you can find the review cards are on all of our various social media things. Whenever a game is reviewed, it gets a little cool card. And this is a showcase of nearly 300 of them. So I really like it. It's a really, really cool book. I highly suggest you check it out. I also suggest that you check out our past episodes of Random Encounter. In our last episode, we got to chat a little bit about the announcement of the Switch 2. Really excited about this because finally we're getting something that's no longer a potato. I'm hoping it's not a potato. It's baked potato, twice baked potato. And along with Wes's thoughts on Dynasty Warriors Origins and Abe's on his memoir, The Oath in Falgana. We also have Retro Encounter. Last week was the second part of the two-parter focused on Final Fantasy IX. And just as a reminder, Retro is moving to a new twice-monthly format, so the next episode will be out on February 13th. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fan's music podcast. Last week was a sequel to one of our favorite episodes in 2024, How to Build Your Own RPG Soundtrack. So this is Build Your Own RPG Soundtrack Hard Mode. And our panel builds, like it sounds, their ideal RPG soundtrack. But there are some interesting new rules in there that make it a bigger challenge for them. So give that a check. If you'd like to get in contact with us here, you can fire me off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. If you have any suggestions for discussion questions like that discussion question got pretty heated above. If you have anything like that, would love to hear it from you. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can do so at my email, jlogan@rpgfan.com. But you can also find me on Blue Sky at johnologan.thesky.social. And I'm not the only person on here with a social media presence. Aleks, where can we find you?
You can just email me at alexfrenichek@gmail.com.
Cool. And Paul?
Yeah, I don't have a huge presence at the moment. I am on Blue Sky. I believe it's just Paul Skevington again. And to be honest, that's probably the best place to find me at the moment.
Okay. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. You can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Please feel free to leave us a review. I would love to read them. Aleks, Paul, thank you so much for spending your Saturday. We're recording this a few days ahead. Turns out this thing isn't live. When you're listening to it, it's not happening on whatever time you're listening to it. I know, it's crazy. So thank you very much for spending your Saturday afternoon with me, or I guess in Paul's case, Saturday evening.
It is, yeah.
I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you. Thanks for
having
having me on. Yeah.
And as always, I really appreciate you giving your time to play these games and review these games for the site. Thanks. And to everyone out there listening, whatever you're playing, have fun.